it's good to be with you again, Peter, to do this podcast this morning. You know, before I came here this morning, I was sitting there talking with a gentleman, and he was telling me about his son, and it was so interesting to me because his son is nonverbal. So his son doesn't have any language skills yet. Son's a little bit older, and they're wrestling with how to communicate. This son actually has a pad, kind of like your iPad, where he communicates and tells them what he wants. Well, it's been interesting since school's been out. His son has kind of fallen back into a pattern where the son doesn't know how to communicate. He doesn't use the sign languages, doesn't use the pad. And so the son is always, I shouldn't say always, is regularly happy, but on occasion he gets so frustrated because he can't communicate, can't get the words out, can't tell people what's on his heart. And so they've been dealing with this issue where his son, would bite either mom, dad, or the sisters because he wants to tell them something, but he doesn't know how to get their attention, so he just walks up and bites them. Now, you know, sounds horrific, but we were laughing about it because we were both kind of thinking about this moment in which, what would it be like if we couldn't communicate with somebody and wanted to tell them something that was so important to us? Would we get angry? Would our emotions overtake us? And as we sat there, I started thinking, what's the scriptural piece where somebody shares something and they've got to know them in a way that at least can help them? Do you have any ideas?
You know, this is so interesting for us to talk about a language and communication. Every community, every culture has a language. And I'm not talking about just colloquial or just a language literally. We all speak English, that's okay. But in this English neighborhood, there are a lot of micro neighborhoods, people that are living differently and they have a different language. And that's what we need to know. And I think the master communicator is Jesus. You begin to see Jesus, how wonderful he communicates in the scripture to every group of people. I wish we could just pause and see every segment of the story that Jesus relates to people and how he does it. I mean, he's a master communicator. And so we come to John chapter 4, you realize a woman from a Samaritan culture, and she's already outcast from her culture. So here is a culture, and she's an outcast of that culture, and she is an outcast of that culture, the subculture, because she doesn't come to the well at the same time other women come.
And that's such an interesting story, right? The moment she kind of wanders up, middle of the day,
Yes.
women would not have done that. Normally they're going to get out there before the hot sun.
Yes.
She knew it was going to be empty.
Yes.
She wouldn't have to take the ridicule. She didn't have to really have any conversations, but she felt the entire community's disdain for her. And here she comes as the Samaritan woman to this well, and there's this guy sitting there.
And you know, this is a master moment, a moment for the master to show his grace and his love. First is the language. All of us have a language. You know, there are 7,000 languages in the world. Imagine that.
Wow.
I mean, so many languages, our culture, we live in so many languages. Sometimes you go to shopping, you hear people speaking in their languages, and because we don't understand them, we become critical of them. We get frustrated with them. But Jesus knew her culture. Jesus comes from a different culture. She's from a different culture. And you know, Jews don't talk to the women. They don't regard women as women in their culture. And it is so hard. But yet Jesus completely understands. And I think the first thing that we need to do in understanding people, touching people's life, to understand their person. Whatever their background, whatever their clothes they're wearing, whatever the situation they're in, I think understanding helps us to build a bridge. Jesus understood her deeper need of life. She needed to be set free from inside when she comes to the well, and Jesus begins to talk to her. Her language, water. She came for the water. He says, I need water.
Right. He found that common ground, right?
Yes.
They often say if you want to have a conversation with somebody, you know, find the minimum place where the two of you can have a conversation, right?
Yes.
Find that one place where you can connect. You know, I often think, because I'm the older Caucasian guy. When I go to get a cup of coffee or I go to a food place, I'm always thinking in my mind, how do I connect with this person? I want to use their name, but it never seems enough. Well, the reason I got the tattoo was because these are great conversation starters. If I really want to ask somebody or get to know somebody, I ask them about their tattoo. What's your favorite one? Tell me the story behind it. And out of that, we create a minimum place where we begin to have that conversation, just kind of like Jesus did with the water at the well.
Yes. And a lot of human communication is nonverbal. I want us to understand, because you speak something, because you tell something, it's sometimes not sure if the person on the other side understands you with more clarity. I think our posture is important. Our nonverbal communication is very important to us. They say that 70% of all our communication is nonverbal, and I'm imagining Jesus sitting at the well, a rabbi and who knows everything and who could tell her off if he wants to. But I think his posture was so calm that she was even taking some pokes at him. Remember the story?
Yeah.
Those who know the story, it's so beautiful. She pokes at Jesus. You being a Jew, you being this, how can you ask and how can you do this? And yet he's so calm, he sees the deeper need in a person's life. And I think that's very important for us. He could communicate, he could tell her, but I think the posture is so important for us. And I think in our culture, this is so important for us. We become a culture which is on a rush, or so sometimes arrogancy, and when you see people trying to communicate, I think this is what you see. Nonverbal is very important. I think Jesus gave her a presence of grace, so she was free to talk. Jesus brings out something in her life that was not healthy for her,
Right.
and she is not offended by that, because I think the calmness, just the calmness of his presence. And I think all of us that facing some situations in our life, my friends may not understand me, but I want to assure you, God will understand you. Isn't that marvelous? God understands our feelings. God understands the depth of our pain. God understands when nobody else understands you. And I think this is where we miss the story from the scriptures, that God is so much interested to communicate with us. He wants to communicate with us. And people miss that idea of communication. So that's why he takes the human form to communicate to us.
And how powerful it is to think, right, about here's this woman coming up with her shame and her guilt and her cultural differences and everything else. And as you said, kind of feeling like she's less than. And he just engages her in that moment. He hears her without actually, even before the first words are spoken. He knew her. And I'm with you. Nonverbal communication means so much. I can only imagine what his eyes would have said to her.
Yes.
Like before he even opened his, the look, when she walked up, her fear of him and him looking at her, and she expecting a certain kind of, I don't know, roll of the eyes or some kind of other judgment. And yet, that's not what she got.
Yeah.
She got, I call them the Jesus eyes. You have them sometimes. And it's just this look of love that radiates from our heart, through our eyes, to another human being. And they realize, oh, they care.
Yes. Yeah, eyes speak a lot. We don't realize that eyes communicate so much, and I think that's what your description is so well, that he must have looked at her with the eyes of love and grace and forgiveness. And even though she tried to pick on him and try to say some things, he never responded to her. He could have, he didn't respond to her that way, but he says, other things we need to deal with it. And I think that's the human communication. Language is so important in this story. And I like to just share a story of a church. There are so many churches. The neighborhoods are changing. People in the neighborhood don't know why this church on this corner. So one of the churches that I read the story, that the church says, we'll just go out and do some contacting people and telling them we are here, we're having a free dinner and all that. When they started knocking on the doors, the center has done that. And when they started knocking on the doors, the responses were quite interesting. Some of them said, oh, we didn't know what that building was. And somebody said, well, we're not into the spiritual stuff. And then one of the knocks on the door, the lady said, I used to go to that church. Now I don't go. They asked her why. And she said, I was a very good member, regular member, but since I got my divorce, my hurt, my pain stopped me from going because I thought the church people will talk about me. And then they had to explain to her, this is a church that doesn't judge anybody. Because here's the story. We all have broken pieces in our life. We all can focus on the broken pieces. Are we going to focus on that? If we're going to focus on the Lord, we don't focus on minor things that are in our life. Jesus was doing that with her. She was a broken woman. He could have picked on those pieces, but he says there's a bigger need in your life. She knew the language, worship and all that stuff. She spoke to him. But I think people are looking for a bigger picture. And when the church told this woman, please come back, we're not judgmental. We're people broken just as you are. And she went back to the church and became a member. I wish some of the churches in our neighborhoods would just drop their guards, knock on the door, speak the language of the people. Her language was, people will judge me. I don't want to go. I'm ashamed what happened in my life. Right?
Right.
And how many children are there? How many people are in our neighborhoods that are broken, or maybe they're alcoholic, addicted to drugs and all that stuff? And people drive from miles to come to a church building.
Right.
But really, have you gone in the neighborhood and seen the neighbor has changed, Bob?
Right. Well, and in that connection point, right? How do I connect to my neighbor across the street? There's a great study that was done out there, and it talked about all the barriers you have to cross to meet your neighbor, or to come to a church. Like, they can drive by all day, but if they don't have any understanding of what we do in the building, it's a mystery to them.
Yes.
And think of the fear it is to cross things that you don't understand.
Yeah.
And so we, as the church body, God incarnate, is now run from the church out into the world. If we were more like Jesus, we'd be out connecting. We'd be looking for the modern day woman at the well.
Yes.
And we want to have that conversation with them in love, right? How many times that has not happened?
Yeah.
What a great lesson for us this morning, right?
Yeah. We will go forward with this next episode. We'll talk about Jesus stepping out of his culture. It is so important. We're all stuck in our cultures. When I was pastoring a church, I remember one of my members saying, another culture used to come to the church, and this sister made a comment. She said, why can't they be like us? And I said, wait a minute, what is us?
Yeah.
Who is us?
Right.
So I think it's very important for us to step out of our culture to meet another culture. I think God has made all the cultures. We need to understand that.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to having another conversation with you shortly about culture. Right?
Yes.
All right. Well, we hope that you'll join us on our next opportunity, which should be coming up shortly. So we hope you'll continue to tune in to this Peter and I's favorite time of the week, this podcast.